Today, I have a story to tell you. It's about when I won a major international forms competition performing Master Guilin Ying's Northern Shaolin form, Chachuan, while wearing street clothes. I like to tell these stories because they not only help you to get to know me as a practitioner, but they also give you a flavor of the times of what I like to call earlier American Gong Fu. So these were the early days of American Kung Fu, um, and the Kung Fu was all kept in a close-knit society in the major Chinatown cities. Also, since we're studying Chachuan, I thought it would be a good time to tell the story because it really serves to illustrate how fundamental uh, Master Guilin Ying's Northern Shaolin is pertinent to developing form and fundamentals. During this time, I was studying with Sifu in San Francisco. I was living in Forestville, which is in Sonoma County, and it was about an hour and a half drive down to the Bay Area. And since Sifu liked for practitioners to get there by 5 o'clock, we would have to leave Forestville at about 3:30 in the morning. And our young son was pretty small at that time, so at 3:30, my wife and I would pack the bus and put our son in a Volkswagen bus, and we drive down to the city. I was studying sword dandao with Sifu at that time, and Sifu many times would have one of my fellow practitioners run up to the car as soon as I arrived and tell me to come down and perform my form. And how well I performed that form would dictate whether I learned another lesson that day or in the following time, weeks or whatever. And the reason why Sifu did this was to instill in me the idea, and he told me this, that many times if you have to perform your Kung Fu, you don't have time to do warm up or stretching. And that created the idea in me and in my practice that there should be no boundary between your everyday life and your practice. And this is something that I've been teaching in these video instructions, and I teach in to my students in person as well. The idea that you should kind of keep no boundaries between your everyday life and your practice. And going along with this idea, I started to decide that whatever I wore, I need to be able to do my kung fu. And so when I go to the store and pick out a pair of pants or something, I would do the drop stance, the falling stance, to see, how I could keep my movement wearing that same clothes. So the clothes that I wore in those days was just basic loose trousers, usually a turtleneck or a t-shirt, a loose shirt, and flat sole shoes. You have to understand that in the early days, the Chinese started to immigrate to America around the 1890s. My family came about 1895 to America. I'm fourth generation Chinese American. And my grandmother actually survived, great grandmother on my mother's side, survived the 1906 earthquake. So we've been here for quite a while. But most of the Chinese came from southern China, Guangdong province, and some of the other southern provinces of China. And the Kung Fu was kept in this close-knit society of the major American cities, with San Francisco being one of the main centers. The Kung Fu was taught in clubs throughout Chinatown. For example, Y.C. Wong had a club right across the street from Sifu Studio on Portsmouth Square. In 1979, some of the local masters decided to put on a major exhibition of Kung Fu to make it known to the larger public. And it was called 1979 International Martial Arts Exhibition. The exhibition was um, presented by William Su, directed by Hak Fu Chan, and they had Brendan Lai, who is known for seven-star praying mantis, as the master of ceremonies. And the exhibition included all the major Sifus, the masters in current, at the time, Chinese Kung Fu world. You have to remember that at this time, many masters had not come over from China yet, from mainland China. And the Wushu didn't come to America until 1974. And this pamphlet of the first exhibition of Wushu is dated 1974. So during this early period of American Gong Fu, it was mostly the local Chinatown Sifus, and all the well-known ones were in this exhibition. The list of performers was quite extensive and covered many different styles. William Seal, the producer, performed White Crane. Sifu Hak Fu Chan, the director, performed each one. Brendan Lai of Praying Mantis, Y.C. Wong of Hungar, Chuk Fung Hap Ga, Dak Bai Wong Choi Li Fat, Anthony Chan performing Wushu, Leung Kun performing White Crane, Bill Owens, Y.C. Jiang performed White Crane, Ernie Reyes with the Choi's West Coast demo team, Bosim Mark performing Bakwa, Adam Shu, Tung Kai Yin with Tai Chi, Roger Tung, Long Fist Style, Jim Lau, Wing Chun, and many more. And this is like the brochure that each of the spectators got when they came to the exhibition, the programs. Also, you have to remember that this is the early days, and of course there was no internet or social media. And so the only way to communicate about this exhibition was through like a magazines like Inside Kung Fu or the San Francisco Chronicle, the larger newspapers, maybe radio, and posters plastered around. So it wasn't easy to kind of publicize this exhibition to the public. And of course, the announcement of this exhibition to take place in February 16th and 17th of 1979 ran through the Kung Fu circles. Again, the Kung Fu community was pretty small at that time. All the Sifus knew each other. They all knew Sifu Master Guo Ling Ying, being, since he was in the middle of Portsmouth Square, in the middle, right in the dead center of Chinatown. Also at this time, I was going down to Sifu's regularly, and my parents lived in Belmont, which is about 30 minutes south of San Francisco on the peninsula. And so my wife and I would commute from Forestville down to Sifu's class at 5 in the morning on a Saturday, and then we would do the class, and then afterwards we would drive down to my parents' house in Belmont. And at that time, I was doing a remodeling job for them. I was building a lanai, kind of an enclosure over their back porch. And so we would stay there on the weekend, sometimes overnight, and then drive home, go to Sifu's class on Sunday, and drive home. And that was pretty regular for that time period. So this weekend that the exhibition was going to take place, I decided to ask one of my very good friends, Don Boone, if he wanted to go to the exhibition with me to see what they were doing. Here's a photo of Don Boone and me in a moment in front of Sifu Studio down in Portsmouth Square. I met Don when I was giving a performance. In the early days when I was teaching, there was 4 other teachers in Sonoma County, and Don Boone was sitting with this guy named Nam Singh who had grown up in China and studied Cheng Manqing Tai Chi. And when I gave a performance for his club, Don was sitting in the audience, and when he saw me performing my tantra, he became enamored with that form and came to study with me, and eventually went on to study with Sifu in Portsmouth Square himself. And he and I were really good friends through many of those years. Again, because the publications and the announcements weren't really clear, I kind of made a mistake. And I guess the mistake was both, you know, bad because I couldn't see many of the demonstrations of masters, but it was fortunate because I ended up going at a time when my story would actually take place, and you will see why. So I told Don after class on Saturday that I'd pick him up and we go over to Oakland to see the exhibition. We drove over in my bus, and when we got to Oakland, we kind of found where the Oakland auditorium was, and then we parked kind of a few blocks away, so we didn't have to get involved in the large crowds. And there was a lot of people walking. We kind of followed the crowd. When we got into the auditorium, we paid and we got the brochure and the pamphlet and stuff. Was kind of disappointing because we saw that it was a large auditorium with kind of hardwood floors, and there was bleachers, kind of like any gymnasium. And we looked down and we saw a lot of young students performing kung fu forms, but not very good. I think ended up just with an intermediate competition. And so we kind of watched for a while, and there wasn't that much happening. I think there was like about 2 or 3 different areas where they were performing and being judged. And at one point, Don Boone turned to me and said, "You could do a lot better than these people." So at one point there was a break, and then all of a sudden these other uh, students, they dressed in their outfits, their uniforms and stuff, came in and started warming up. And Don said to me, "Maybe you should go down and see if you can compete." And I said, "Huh?" You know. And Don said, "Yeah, you would do better than any of these people. So go down and see if you can compete." So at that point, they had already kind of started to assemble this group of practitioners that were going to compete in this kind of large area. And so I walked down there before they were just starting. And when I got there, I saw it was Brendan Lai. And I had known Brendan Lai actually from before because in 1976, when we were celebrating Bing's 10th year anniversary, Sifu had sent me over to Brendan Lai to buy a sword, and Brendan Lai got to know me, and he knew that I was teaching, and he kind of encouraged me to sell his goods in Sonoma County, and so I knew Brendan Lai, and alongside Brendan Lai was this Caucasian man that I didn't know, who I later found out to be L. Novak. And El Novak was the first Caucasian to master iron palm style and became very famous. So I went and asked the two judges, Brendan Lai and Al Novak, if I could perform. And Brendan Lai turned to me and said, "Do you have a uniform?" And I said, "No, I'm going to perform in street clothes." And they kind of hesitated a moment, looked at each other, and then Brendan Lai said, "Okay." And he asked me, even though he knew that I studied with Bo, he did it formally. He asked me, "What school are you from?" And I told him, Guo Lin Ying Academy. And then he asked me what I was going to perform, and I told him, Chachuan from Master Guo's Northern Shaolin. And then finally he asked me, "What rank are you?" And I looked around and I could see the contestants were probably black belt, and that was the highest category. And this was an open tournament, so there was all different styles. So even though Master Gold didn't have any kind of ranking system, I just told him black belt, and he said fine. And then they told me to go and sit down by the other contestants. Well, I must have stuck out like a sore thumb, in my street clothes because everybody was in their fancy kung fu or karate uniforms, ready to perform. And I could feel some of the contestants sizing me up like, "Who's this guy in street clothes?" And I also knew that this was going to be a true test of what Sifu had um, told me. That at some point, you're going to have to perform the Kung Fu without any warm ups or rehearsals. And this was exactly that moment because everybody else had warmed up and done their rehearsals, but I was going to do my form stone cold. So I sat down between the contestants. They were all seated around the competing area. Now, I wasn't the first one to be called. I was kind of somewhere in the middle of the pack. And I remember I didn't really want to watch any of the contestants performing. I didn't want to be intimidated. I didn't want to get confused. So I just kind of sat there and kind of in my mind focused on my own form and what I wanted to do. When it came time for me to perform, I remember doing my performance and at the end not being totally happy with it. I thought there was a couple of mistakes, and so I went and sat back down. I don't have a film of that performance, of course, because in those days nobody carried a phone and only a few people carried a camera around. And I hadn't gone to the exhibition thinking that I was going to perform in any way. It was kind of totally off the wall that I did this competition. But I do have a film of me from that period that I took at the local high school where I was practicing a form that I made up from the three forms of Tantui, Chachuan, and Arlong. I combined the moves to make my own form. So this film that I'm going to show you, the short clip, is a good representation of how I was during that period, my agility and my foundation. After everybody had done their performances, then Brendan and I and El Novak took a time to confer. And as we were sitting there and they announced the winner of the competition, they called out my name. And again, I remember I was pretty surprised because I hadn't gone there to compete. And when I actually went down there, I just wanted to do a performance. I didn't know that there was anything that we were trying to compete for. And when they handed me this gigantic trophy that was about this tall, it was like, it really took me by surprise. I never even for 1 second thought that there was a big trophy or anything that you would win. Um, and so afterwards, Brendan and I came up to me and he said, "Randy, your Sifu's Kung Fu is not flashy enough to win competitions, but the reason why we awarded you the first place was because your performance showed your knowledge of fundamentals so well." And that goes back to what I was saying in the very beginning of this presentation, is that uh, this performance, winning this performance, solidified the idea that Master Go's Northern Shaolin was a true builder of solid foundation. Many years later, after we all kind of started going to other teachers, all the students at Sifu Kuo were recognized for their solid foundations. So I took the trophy, and Don was sitting in the audience and kind of gave me a big smile, like, "Whoa, that was something." And of course, that was kind of the culmination of that afternoon's activities, because again, I didn't realize that when we went in the afternoon, that the exhibitions were all in the masters were all in the evening. So we decided to leave after that, winning that trophy. The car was a few blocks away. I remember as we walked back to where I parked the bus, carrying this huge trophy, people were walking along the streets were pointing, "Look at that guy with a trophy." And it was kind of a funny moment walking back to the bus with the trophy. So we drove back to the city, and I dropped Don Boone off and went down to my parents' house where I left my wife Linda and my son. And when I knocked on the door, I was carrying the trophy, and when they opened the door, here was this gigantic trophy that I had won that afternoon unexpectedly. And this is a photo of me holding that trophy in front of the lanai that I was building for my parents. And it's probably the clothing that I was wearing that day because I don't remember changing anything. So it was a kind of a white turtleneck and some slacks. I don't have that trophy anymore. All I have is the brochure and the photos of me with the trophy and my son with the trophy. The following weekend, when I went back down to the studio, Sifu just had a glimmer in his eye and a big smile. We never talked about it after that, but I think I made him proud because I was the first one to use his Shaolin to win any kind of competition, and I may be the only one that ever did that. Sifu was not really into that sort of thing. He just taught his kung fu uh, for us to have a good practice. He never talked about entering competitions or anything like that. So that's the story of how I won first place in a major forms competition wearing street clothes. I think it was just kind of makes a funny story.